All right. We're very pleased to have with us Special Rapporteur Reem Alsalem. She is the Special Rapporteur for violence against women and girls, its causes and its consequences. As you know, the Special Rapporteur is in New York because it's the annual session of the Third Committee. The Third Committee addresses issues of social development as well as human rights. And so in her briefing earlier today, the Special Rapporteur spoke about the various types of violence that women and girls face, specifically in sports. And to reiterate, the Special Rapporteur, and this goes for all Special Rapporteurs, all independent experts, is an independent voice. She's independent from the United Nations. Madame, whenever you're ready.
So good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming and for your interest in engaging with me on my report. As was just mentioned, I just presented my report on violence against women and girls in sport. I actually chose this topic because as an approach to my mandate, I like to focus on themes that raise complex issues, complex human rights issues, and that may not have been unpacked sufficiently from that perspective, as well as shed the light on groups of women and girls that are discriminated against or that may experience violence on intersecting grounds, but that have not been sufficiently discussed as such. Not to mention that, of course, we had the Paris Olympics this year, and there's a number of emergent issues that women and girls confront in sports, hence my decision to do a dedicated report to violence against women and girls in sport. In a nutshell, I've concluded that violence against women and girls in sport is a serious, systemic, and systematic human rights issue that demands immediate attention at all levels. As said, women and girls in sport face multiple forms of violence, and I outline them in the report: economic forms of violence, physical, psychological, coercive control, online violence, and also for children, girls, they face neglect, particularly in some sports such as gymnastics. I have detailed the structural causes of violence against women and girls in sport, which include, amongst others, male-dominated cultures, underrepresentation of women in leadership roles, unequal investment in female sports. And all these are challenges that are particularly exacerbated for groups of women based on their sex, gender, age, race, religion, disability, etc. The report also details systemic barriers that prevent women and girls from participating in sport on equal footing with men and boys. And these include harmful social stereotypes, the pervasive sexism in sport, the absence of role models, the unequal share of caregiving responsibilities that women have to put up with, and the limited access to training facilities, infrastructure, and resources, particularly when compared to what men and boys have. The report also describes the most common perpetrators of violence and their accomplices, which include state and non-state actors. So I speak about coaches, professional colleagues, family members, managers, spectators, policymakers, and I assert within that conversation that states can also be considered complicit when they fail to prevent, prosecute, and sanction acts of violence against women and girls in sport. Now, as we know, women and girls in sport already have so many odds stacked against them that impede their equal and effective participation. So in addition to all these that I've just mentioned, their ability to play sports in condition of safety, dignity, and fairness has been further eroded by the intrusion of males who identify as female in female-only sports categories and spaces. So I've called for the creation in sports of open categories and the reintroduction or the introduction of non-invasive, confidential, and simple sex screenings where necessary to ensure the inclusive participation of all persons in sports, however they may identify, while guaranteeing fairness, safety, and dignity for female athletes. I also make a strong recommendation to all actors to address the issue of impunity for acts of violence committed, because this continued impunity fosters the culture of silence and injustice. And that is brought about in part by the autonomous regulatory frameworks of sports organizations that we have, which don't sufficiently incorporate a human rights lens or framework in the work, and they tend to prioritize reputation and winning over justice and accountability to victims. I made a very deliberate decision to also include references to good practices adopted particularly by states, but also by other actors. And I was very heartened actually by the high number of input I received from states for this report compared to other reports. But this is stemming out of my belief that a number of actors, including states, are trying to address the causes of violence against women and girls in sport, are trying to improve and encourage the participation of women and girls in sports, and that sharing good practices is also beneficial for taking these efforts forward. I think there is a recognition across the board globally that sports can be a very important vehicle for bringing about social change, for achieving sex and gender equality, and for empowering women and girls to take up, obviously, their rightful place in society. After all, they're half of society. But that this will not happen unless everyone commits to making sports safer and fairer for women and girls. So with that, I'll stop here, and happy to take any questions that you may have.
And if you don't mind, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Justicia. I'm a Dag Hammarskjöld's fellow, a journalist from Namibia. With this report, in terms of sports, I just wanted to find out which sport code is most prevalent to violence for women and girls, and also what age ranges are this violence on women and girls more prone to, and in what regions do these women and girls experience most violence when it comes to sports?
You want me to address? Thank you for that. So, as this is a global report, I have not delved into individual sports, with the exception of neglect, where, as I said, there was a clear indication that neglect can be experienced particularly by girls in gymnastics. And that also the sports that emphasize, let's say, lightness and shape, the girls and women in those can experience a lot of body shaming, which I consider to be a form of violence.
My name is Ridwan Karim Dini Osman. I'm also a Dag Hammarskjöld Fellow, and I report for the EIB network in Ghana. I would like you to throw more light on the methodology, the sample size, which countries were, involved in this report. I would also like to find out, I know women and girls are often most vulnerable, but we've also heard of instances where boys are sexually abused by their colleague in the same, field of sport.
Yeah.
And the thing with boys is that there is a lot of stigma in coming out to say that you have been sexually violated. So they never come out. Is this something that has come to your attention, or is this something that you intend to pursue in the future? Thank you.
So with regards to the methodology, I followed the methodology that I follow for all my reports. We usually put out a call for input. So we invite any actors, could be actual women and girls in sports, could be civil society, could be experts, states. So anyone can send confidential input. And I've received for this over 100 pieces of input. Then we usually obviously do also research, secondary available resources, sources that are credible and solid. And then we organize also expert consultations. I've organized expert consultations that were cross-regional, again, intersectional also from including different actors that have also very different views about some of the issues that I have raised. And then based on that, I do my analysis. Keep in mind that in the end, I look for information that supports the human rights-centered analysis that I'm trying to do. So it's looking at the rights of women and girls in sports as enshrined in international human rights law, but also therefore the rights that are violated and the rights and the duties of duty bearers like states, like sports associations towards them. So the common denominator through all these sections is what does human rights law say about that, yeah? Rather than an academic sort of piece of work. With regards to your comment about boys, I fully agree. I'm sure there are a lot of forms of violence that boys share with girls. Regrettably, or not, but my mandate focuses on violence against women and girls, and therefore I have to keep that focus in my reports and engagement, so I couldn't go into those details. However, that said, what is clear is that when we also carry out educational programs to address violence against women and girls, we have to also target men and boys, not just through education, but also other approaches. So.
We'll go here first, and then Pamela, and then Al-Hamid.
Thank you. Am I allowed to go off topic? Is that allowed?
Yes,
Thank
please
you.
do, yeah.
I want to ask you a question about the situation.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm Sharifa Chitin from Anadolu Agency. Recent analysis and studies are indicating that more women and children have been killed in Gaza by the Israeli military in the past year than in any other recent conflict over a single year. And we have also seen reports that Palestinian women and girls are subject to sexual violence by Israeli soldiers. And you must have seen on social media, in the houses that they have destroyed, they pose with their undergarments, and it's quite disrespectful. Israel has also destroyed Gaza's largest fertility clinic, and the United Nations is often defining the situation in Gaza as a war on women and a war on children. So do you think Israel is systematically attacking women and children in Gaza, and if so, why? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure you are aware that I have also repeatedly spoken and expressed alarm at the treatment of Palestinian women and children, civilians, but particularly also women and children, including girls, and at all the forms of violence that have been experienced by them, including sexual violence. And here, maybe to also refer to the previous comment, we know Palestinian men have also experienced sexual violence. Yesterday marked the one-year anniversary since October the 7th, and we also issued a statement in which we also condemned the killing and violence committed against Israelis and foreign nationals on October 7th, including sexual violence where that has been determined to be the case. I have also specifically spoken about the use of reproductive violence in the war on Gaza, in the unfolding genocide in Gaza, which is unparalleled in other conflicts. And some of the examples you have mentioned, I think there has been a relentless attack on women for being the reproductive bearers of Palestinian lives. We have seen that through the killing of orders to abandon newly born infants, the attack on the fertility clinic, the huge dehydration and hunger that pregnant and lactating women go through, not to mention the attack on the health infrastructure, which obviously you need hospitals to also deliver. So there's definitely a deliberate attack there, and it's linked to the way in which Palestinian women and children have been deliberately dehumanized, not just by the Israeli government, but I would say by many parts of Israeli society and actors with influence. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Pamela, you had raised your hand.
Yes, I still.
And then Hami.
Thank you. Thank you. Oops. Thank you for the briefing. It's Pamela Fall from U.S. News and World Report. There, some of the other UN agencies, UNICEF in particular, have some of the violence numbers up to about 2022. Since, in the last 2 years, put it that way, have you seen a rise in violence against women and girls around the world?
Overall, you mean?
Yeah.
So, it's obviously difficult to really compare very clearly because we've always said that there is a problem with the data that we have. So on one hand, you can see a marked increase in certain things, certain phenomena. Like take femicide, for example, the deliberate, the killing of women because they are women or girls. So in some instances, if we see an increase, that could be related to the fact that there are more killings taking place and therefore more impunity for this violence. However, in some instances, it could be also improved reporting and improved data collection. But what we know is that globally, the issue of violence continues to be really an emergency scale phenomenon. 1 in 3 women experience gender-based violence of a serious nature. Yes, and I would say that this is an understatement, even it's a tip of the iceberg. What, though, we also see is that there is this attempt to decriminalize or delegitimize or normalize serious forms of violence against women. So we've all heard about attempts to, for example, roll back on the criminalization of female genital mutilation. We know that during war, we've seen really an alarming use of violence against women and girls, including sexual violence, reproductive violence as tools of war, with the threats to international humanitarian law and the law of armed conflict and the protection to civilians and protection to women. I would say that this has exposed women to increased violence and exploitation during conflict and humanitarian settings, because the respect, I think, by warring parties to these rights and standards it leaves much to be desired and is worsening. And then, of course, other forms like child marriage, so things we've taken for granted, there are attempts to roll back those rights. And that is very concerning. And I, as I've said to the Council, the Human Rights Council in June, I consider prostitution very much a system of violence and exploitation of women and girls, including pornography. And therefore, attempts we see in some corners of the world to normalize the buying of sexual acts means normalizing that violence as well.
And a quick follow-up. Does your office deal with the abduction of children? In other words, the estimated 20,000 children who were taken from Ukraine to Russia and their treatment?
So in principle, if this came to my attention as a mandate holder, I would be able to deal with it. I have not dealt with that situation specifically. I'm aware of it, but my mandate has not received information on that. I have engaged with the Ukrainian government recently on a draft law in order to provide reparations for survivors of sexual violence as a result of the Russian aggression on Ukraine. And I have dealt with the issue of abduction within the issue of family custody cases, where a parent may forcefully remove a child, and the reasons for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You've been very patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Reem. Abdel Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have few interrelated questions.
Please.
First, I will ask you if you visited Gaza since October 7, and since your mandate is in general about sexual violation of women, if you also tell us more about the situation of pregnant women in Gaza and their suffering when they give, and how they can have a safe birth of their infants. And since you worked in the past for the ICC, can you shed more light about the relation between your office and the prosecutor, and if you can put some reports to help prosecutor reach that decision who is committing war crimes in Gaza? And as you know, there are many number of Palestinian women were released from jail, and they all gave testimony about sexual harassment and sexual abuse. If you put a report about that, have you met with them? Have you talked to any of those women? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So within the first few months of after October 7th, I had written actually to both the government of Palestine and the government of Israel requesting a visit in order to be able to also examine more closely first-hand information about the events on October 7th, but also since then. The state of Palestine had welcomed a visit, but it is physically impossible, also because we would need permission by the government of Israel to go. And it is both, it's not possible to go to Gaza or actually the West Bank at the moment, let's say in safety and security in order to do that work. The government of Israel never responded to my request for a visit. I had also requested Israeli civil society organizations, victims, and the government for information about the events of October the 7th. I have not received that. With regards to your question about engagement with the ICC, let me tell you how we engage generally with courts. With some courts, we do have, depending on the theme and the topic at hand, we may share some information with specific judges on sort of the work that we're doing. We do also engage with courts on emblematic cases, strategic litigation, so we might be we might be there through an amicus brief if we think that the issue is very important. As you know, the Special Rapporteur on the occupied territories has also been leading on the engagement with the International Court of Justice, on the ICC, and also called on states and all stakeholders to collaborate with both actually in their work. On sexual harassment and violence, I'm sure you're aware that the mandate had led on a letter to Israel regarding reports of sexual violence conducted against Palestinian women. In general, we receive our information from either victims, organizations representing them, or other actors, and that information is confidential. So I cannot really elaborate on who I met with or who I didn't, but our procedures are open to receiving in a confidential manner information from all actors, and then taking action if we so desire. On pregnant women, I think I've sort of spoken to that the conditions really for life have been decimated in Gaza, and therefore also for the creation of new life and for birth So yeah.
Hi, Reem. Dawn Clancy. How are you? I have two questions related to the report and something else. You mentioned it here as well about the idea of creating open categories of competition.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what kind of feedback or pushback you got related to that. And then I also wanted to ask you about the pharmaceutical testosterone suppression and how that isn't really a good indicator or doesn't really level the playing field between transgender women and biological women. Thank you.
So as you saw in the report, I maintain and recognize the rights and importance of everyone to participate in sports. At the same time, it is not uncommon in human rights law to have a tension between rights and rights holders. And I think this is a situation of tension, but for which there is a good practical solution, which not just I, but others have recommended. And that is to, in order to ensure fairness, dignity, and safety for all, including females, so women and girls, females, we would need to maintain a female-only category in sports, while at the same time also having more open categories for those wishing to play sports in categories that do not respond to the sex they were born into. That is one thing. The other thing is to, as requested by many women and girls in sport, is to bring back, or actually not bring back, is to introduce sex screening, which, as you know, was discontinued in 1999. So that should be sex screening, which have become a lot more reliable now, are cheap, can be administered in a confidential, dignified manner, should be introduced for those, where sports is should be introduced as a sort of as an element of what is that called? Eligibility. Sorry, eligibility in female sports. So that's that. And as we know from the many studies that we have, males have a biological advantage in sport, especially during and after puberty. And artificial suppression of testosterone does not do away with this advantage. This is what the scientists and the experts are saying, not to mention that pressuring anyone to artificially suppress testosterone in order to qualify for any category also raises ethical and human rights issues, which I also spoke about in the report, and should therefore also not be done.
I don't know if anyone else has any questions in the room. I don't see any online. Special Rapporteur, I know you just briefed the third committee.
There was one
yeah, let me give
question.
you one more.
Yes, you asked me about the pushback, the reactions to. So I was very pleased to see really a very high engagement by member states with my report. They had clearly read it, engaged with the recommendations. As expected, there were states who spoke in favor and supported the findings and recommendations. There were others who expressed support and disagreed with it. I see this really in a positive light because it also means that we are finally discussing issues as we should be discussing them, openly, transparently, because it's counterproductive and problematic also from a human rights perspective to have issues as a taboo and not to be able to discuss them. And while continuing to adapt certain policies. So I'm hoping that at least today marked sort of a new chapter where some of these issues can be now discussed more openly, and where different views can feed into decision making and the design of policies and legal frameworks.
All right. Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur.
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah.